Welcome back to Hardware Unboxed. Today we are, for the first time, publishing full performance benchmarks of an AMD Ryzen 4000 processor. Now, despite the naming, the first Ryzen 4000 parts aren't using AMD's upcoming Zen 3 architecture, but rather they are 3rd gen Ryzen APUs that use Zen 2 technology for the first time. The naming is a little confusing there. Ryzen 3000 for Zen 2 desktop chips and Ryzen 4000 for Zen 2 APUs, but this is continuing what AMD started when they launched Zen 1 APUs as Ryzen 2000 back in 2017. As of right now, AMD is focusing on the mobile sector with Ryzen 4000 APUs. We do expect that desktop parts will be available at some point, but at least for the first parts of 2020, AMD has gone all in on mobile. At CES, they launched both U-Series and H-Series SKUs for low power and high performance laptops respectively, and today we have the first retail Ryzen 4000 laptop on the market to evaluate. I'm not going to go over all the new details about 3rd gen Ryzen APUs here. If you're interested in that, we have a full breakdown of the cool architectural features, the specs, and AMD's performance claims in a separate video. The focus today is of course on the benchmarks, so we can see for the first time how Zen 2 brought across to mobile stacks up against Intel's tried and true lineup. As I mentioned before, there are two Ryzen mobile lineups in the U-Series and H-Series, mirroring what Intel offers for different types of laptops. We'll hopefully be able to talk about U-Series soon, but as of right now, there are no ultra-portable Ryzen 4000 laptops available to buy or benchmark just yet, so we'll get to those benchmarks later. Today, it's all about the H-Series and how AMD will fare for content creation, for productivity, and for gaming. Here's a quick refresher on what AMD's Ryzen 4000 H-Series looks like. There are 3 distinct SKUs here. The Ryzen 5 4600H that delivers 6 cores and 12 threads for the mainstream. Then the Ryzen 7 4800H, that bumps up to 8 cores and 16 threads, alongside a higher clocked 8-core variant in the Ryzen 9 4900H. All of these base APUs come with a 45-watt TDP and are complemented by a lower power 35-watt variant for laptops that also adhere to the rest of AMD's HS series design guidelines. You'll also see here different GPU configurations for each SKU, of course using the refreshed Vega design with up to 8 compute units and higher clock speeds. Interesting to note, but I'd expect most H-Series laptops to also include a discrete GPU like our test system has today. Cache, while listed at 12 megabytes, is actually a combined L2 and L3 figure. All SKUs here have 8 megabytes of level 3 cache, Ryzen 7 and 9 get 4 megabytes of level 2, and Ryzen 5 gets 3 megabytes. The chip we're benchmarking today is the Ryzen 9 4900HS, a 35-watt SKU that provides slightly higher base and boost clock speeds than the Ryzen 7 4800H that sits below it at 45 watts. A bit of binning magic at play there. It's not the outright flagship APU in AMD's lineup, but it will give us a really solid look at Ryzen 4000 performance. We'll also give you a sneak peek of Ryzen 7 4800H performance from an engineering sample a bit later, and look to review as many of the other SKUs in this lineup as we can, as of course new laptops start filtering through the market. The test system for today's benchmarking is the Asus Zephyrus G14. I think it's a really neat portable 14-inch gaming laptop that packs in Ryzen 4000 HS series APUs alongside up to NVIDIA GeForce RTX 2060 Max-Q graphics. We have the highest spec model in for testing today with the RTX 2060 Max-Q and 4900HS, alongside 16GB of DDR4 3200 memory and a 1080p 120Hz display. The focus of this video is purely APU performance, so I'm not going to talk about the design or other features of the Zephyrus G14, but from about a week of usage, I think it's a really great laptop actually. Excellent build, great keyboard, and as we're about to see, very compelling performance in such a small form factor. If you're interested in more nitty-gritty stuff about the G14 specifically, check out the Jared's Tech Review when it goes live. He'll dive deep into all of that information. You'll also see across this video a number of different laptop CPUs in the charts and at times GPU configurations as well. The data in these charts is an average from the laptops we've tested with the given hardware, and you can check out the full list of laptops tested in the description below. Testing laptop components is naturally a bit more difficult than desktops, as each configuration can vary in cooling and other hardware, so these averages are meant to illustrate how a typical system will perform. The averages do not include single channel memory systems or any other situations that heavily throttle the components at hand or overclock them, as some systems do that as well. We've tried our best to create apples to apples data where possible. Let's kick things off with a classic performance benchmark, and that's Cinebench R20. In this test, it's an absolute domination by the red team. Not only is the 4900HS the fastest laptop processor we've tested in the multi-threaded workload, it's also the fastest in single-thread performance. The 4900HS is a massive 35% faster than the 8-core Core i9-9880H when it's using all cores, and 7% faster in a single core. There is the Core i9-9980HK that we haven't tested that might put up a bit of a fight, but the 90-watt numbers from the 9880H suggest that this might be a hard task. And of course, these are results from the lower TDP 4900HS. The 4900H at a full 45 watts should be another step ahead. There are some other brutal results here in the Cinebench chart. The 4900HS crushes the Core i7-9750H, which is the most popular CPU used in slim and light gaming notebooks. AMD's Zen 2 offering is over 60% faster in the multi-threaded test, and it's no surprise to see the previous generation AMD part get a bit humiliated here. The 4900HS is so much faster than the Ryzen 7 3750H in the same power envelope that it's not funny. Time for our legacy Cinebench test using R15, which has results from a wider range of CPUs going back more years. Again, there's not much new here in terms of how the 4900HS is placed. It's firmly at the top of the charts. Anyone upgrading from, say, the Core i7-7700HQ, which was a popular H-series CPU in 2017, will be treated to more than double the performance with a Ryzen 9 4900HS. One area that Zen 2 receives a particularly large upgrade in is how it handles AVX256 instructions. It's simply much faster at wide floating point operations than before, so the Ryzen 9 4900HS receives an enormous performance upgrade in our Handbrake X265 test, which uses AVX instructions. The 4900HS is a monstrous 179% faster than the 3750H in this workload, which is just unfathomable for a single generation performance leap, and we're not even comparing the highest end parts in the lineup. On an AMD versus Intel front, it's also highly favorable for AMD. While we don't get the same margins as in Cinebench, we do see a 23% performance advantage to the 4900HS over the 9880H and a 45% advantage over the 9750H. These are, quite frankly, massive performance deltas for a laptop form factor that often receives single-digit gen-on-gen improvements. And this is especially true given the 4900HS is just a 35-watt part compared to the 45 watts that both Intel CPUs run at. In fact, for Intel to match the 4900HS with its 8-core offering, it needs to blow its power target out the window and instead use a 90-watt TDP, which is possible on some gaming laptops with a turbo mode or similar. The difference in power draw at the wall for these two systems is incredible. The G14 with the 4900HS ran comfortably at around 66 watts long term, compared to 150 watts for the power-boosted 9880H in our HP Omen 15 test system. That just goes to show how much more efficient AMD's Zen 2 design is at these long-term workloads. Blender is a similar story to what we've just been showing, with huge performance gains in the 35% range for the 4900HS over the 9880H and 65% range for the 4900HS over the 9750H. A lot of Blender users will probably render on the GPU instead, given it tends to be much faster, but it's another benchmark that illustrates long-term multi-core performance on these laptops. Okay, let's move into some other stuff now. 7-zip is a classic benchmark, and the results here are a bit interesting. In terms of decompression, we once again see AMD pull ahead with a significant victory here. Ryzen processors are known to be very powerful in this workload. However, it does fall behind the 9880H in terms of compression to the tune of around 8%, although AMD does beat lower core count parts like the 9750H. Adobe Photoshop performance is another interesting one. In our Iris Blur test, which is mostly CPU limited, the 4900HS does manage to beat the 9750H, but again falls behind the 9880H, sitting pretty comfortably between those two processors. And this continues to be the case in the more comprehensive Puget Systems Photoshop benchmark, which runs through a range of tests. In both of these workloads, which apply various effects to very high resolution images, the 4900HS is around 10% slower than the 9880H in a core-for-core battle. Granted, we are seeing 40% higher performance than AMD's last-gen APUs. On a more positive note for AMD, let's check out some PCMark 10 numbers. I'm going to focus here on the essentials and productivity workloads as they're CPU limited, whereas the rest of the test depends on the GPU and it's more tricky to get neat apples to apples comparisons for. So anyway, here we have the essentials workload, which covers things like app loading, web browsing, and video conferencing. AMD manages to match the performance of the 9880H here, which may not sound all that impressive until you realize that last gen 3750H gets slaughtered in this test. Now AMD is at a performance parity for these light everyday workloads. Then for productivity, again similar story. When running light workloads, we have performance parity between Intel and AMD offerings, with the Ryzen 9 4900HS outperforming something like the Core i7 9750H. These sorts of tasks were slower than acceptable on last gen Ryzen, so even though Ryzen 4000 isn't crushing Intel like in those long-term workloads, performance parity I think is a good result. However, there are some situations with productivity workloads where Ryzen 4000 isn't as impressive. Our custom Excel benchmark features a lot of number crunching on a large dataset, and it's here that the 9880H does outperform the 4900HS once again. The 4900HS is faster than the 9750H, so it's not a terrible result by any means, but it does seem that large dataset workloads are a bit of a weakness for Ryzen. We see something similar in MATLAB with our ODE and FFT benchmark. Again, lots of data crunching here on large sets of data, and Intel's 9880H does walk away with a victory here with similar sorts of margins to what Excel was showing. Another workload where Ryzen performs well, but not well enough to beat Intel's 8-core competitor, is in our Acrobat PDF export test, which is fully single-threaded. The 9880H is marginally faster here, although we do still see a significant performance increase for the 4900HS over the 3750H. A 20% bump to single-threaded performance in a test that doesn't play nice with AMD is quite decent. One final workload here before we look at GPU acceleration performance is AES 256 performance as provided by SiSoft's Sandra benchmark. In the multi-threaded test, we see 15% higher AES performance from the 4900HS versus 9880H to make it the fastest CPU we've looked at for cryptography workloads. This does give Ryzen a neat advantage in two heavily utilized low-level tasks in decompression and cryptography. Now let's work through our Premiere tests. We do have a few of them, and a lot of them are GPU accelerated, starting with our one pass encode, which takes advantage of Intel's QuickSync technology. Premiere does not support hardware accelerated encoding on AMD processors at this stage, so for those that like a quick export with slightly reduced image quality at the end, Intel is still the way to go here. In particular, the 4900HS paired with NVIDIA's GeForce RTX 2060 Max-Q is around 20% slower than a Core i7 9750H with an RTX 2060, simply because hardware acceleration is not available. On the other hand, our Core i9 9880H system doesn't support QuickSync acceleration as the iGPU is fully disabled to support G-Sync through the NVIDIA GPU, so we are left with a nice software encoding comparison between the 9880H and 4900HS, where once again the 4900HS pulls away strongly to the tune of 26%. Then we get to our two-pass encode, which produces superior image quality and doesn't support hardware acceleration. This is the sort of encode we do for hardware unbox videos. Performance here falls back to what we see from most long-term workloads on these processors. The 4900HS is 30% faster than the 9880H and 38% faster than the 9750H, despite our 9880H laptop packing a much faster GPU. This test isn't hugely GPU limited, but even with a moderately capable discrete GPU, it appears as though AMD's Zen 2 APU is significantly faster for Premiere encoding outside of QuickSync workloads. But wait, there's more Premiere tests. Here we have a single instance of Warp Stabilizer, which is a hugely demanding effect that runs on a single thread per instance. The 4900HS here managed to stabilize the footage 14% faster than the 9880H and 22% faster than the 9750H, which shows the power of the high single thread performance we first saw with Cinebench. And finally, we have the Puget benchmarks. The Ryzen 9 4900HS is the best laptop CPU for live playback in Premiere, performing 12% better than the 9880H, meaning we're seeing better editing performance. Then for their export benchmark, we see similar numbers to what we were talking about, with QuickSync acceleration assisting with some of this workload. While I don't think many people will actually be using the integrated GPU in these H series processors, given the vast majority of H series laptops also include discrete graphics, it's worth a brief look at how the iGPU fares in a small selection of low-intensity games just to see what improvements AMD has made to the Vega GPU. The 4900HS does have the fastest iGPU configuration available with 8 compute units clocked up to 1750 MHz, and it delivers really impressive results here. In Grand Theft Auto 5, the 4900HS delivered 36% more performance than the Ryzen 7 3750H, which featured 10 Vega compute units at 1400 MHz. On paper, both CPUs have similar raw GPU performance, but with all the advantages AMD talked about like increased memory bandwidth, this new Zen 2 APU is able to pull ahead. In Civilization 6, similar story with the 4900HS providing 37% more performance than the 3750H within the same 35-watt power envelope. And moving to CSGO, that margin remains identical at around 37%. The 4900HS running CSGO exclusively on the integrated graphics was able to achieve over 100 FPS on average using low settings, which I think is pretty nice. And then finally, we have our most performance-intensive iGPU test in Gears 5 running at medium settings. The 4900HS is around 31% faster than the 3750H in this workload, which actually makes it faster than a low-end discrete GPU offering like NVIDIA's MX250 when paired with a U-series CPU. It's not common to see an H-series laptop paired with an MX-class GPU. Normally OEMs opt for more powerful configurations like a GTX 1650 or higher, but with Ryzen 4000 there's really no need to bother with an MX250 or similar discrete GPU in an H-series type design. At this point in the review, we'd normally walk you through some comparison summaries between the Ryzen 9 4900HS and various other CPUs, but I still think there's a few performance questions left on the table here. One is what clock speeds the CPU actually runs at in practice and how boost behaves, and the other is why do we see lower performance in some data-heavy workloads like MATLAB, Excel, and Photoshop. So let's tackle this second part first. I have two main theories as to why we see data-heavy workloads perform this way. The first is a simple one based on the specifications of these processors, in particular cache sizes. The Core i9 9880H has a decent 16 megabytes of level 3 cache, which matches what Intel offer on the desktop with parts like the i9 9900K. However, the Ryzen 9 4900HS has just 8 megabytes of level 3 cache, half of what Intel offers and well below the 32 meg of L3 that AMD packs into their 8-core Zen 2 desktop processors like the Ryzen 7 3700X. Having less cache means less data can be stored in super fast memory and accessed in an instant. When you have high core count, high performance CPU cores, but not enough cache, this can become a bottleneck in some instances. And while this cache amount has doubled for Ryzen Mobile 3000 versus Ryzen Mobile 4000, so is the core count. It's probably not the whole story, but definitely part of it. The other is the memory system. Yes, AMD offers higher memory bandwidth than Intel with the move to supporting DDR4 3200 speeds. Intel only offers DDR4 2666 with 9th gen. In a benchmark like Sandra, we see AMD providing around 35% more memory bandwidth. However, Ryzen 4000 appears to have inferior memory latency, which, like cache size, can become a performance constraint. The Core i9 9880H has memory latency around 30 nanoseconds for datasets above 32 megabytes in size, while the Ryzen 9 4900HS has 46 nanosecond memory latency, so that's a substantial win for Intel. It's hard to say for sure whether these factors are part of the cause or the entire cause, but looking through low-level benchmarks, these were two things that stood out to me. When we get to benchmarking more Ryzen 4000 APUs, we'll get a clearer picture of exactly where these bottlenecks lie, so stay tuned for more investigation into this in some future reviews. As for clock speeds and boost behavior, let's take a look. From a cold start in our Handbrake AVX workload, the Ryzen 9 4900HS pretty consistently boosted up to around 65 watts of power for a few seconds, achieving 4 GHz boost clocks all core, before dropping down to 54 watts for a longer sustained period with clocks around 3.7 GHz. Eventually, the CPU settles down to 35 watts to provide 3.2 GHz all-core just above this processor's 3 GHz base clock. The boost period can vary depending on how warm the system is, but from a cold start, I was generally seeing at least 2 minutes of 53 watt boost, which is pretty generous. Temperatures were actually very well managed here on the Zephyrus G14, with its not quiet, not loud air cooler providing a tick over 70 degrees Celsius sustained, but of course, this will vary between laptops. Now time for the performance summaries. The big one here is the Ryzen 9 4900HS versus the Core i9 9880H. These are similar class processors, 8-core versus 8-core, and should give us a pretty solid indication of what to expect from 10th gen as well if we get minor clock speed improvements from Intel as is rumored. In most long-term multi-thread workloads, we're seeing 35% better performance from the 7nm Zen 2 product. We're also getting impressive numbers for video encoding in the 20 to 30% faster range. Single thread workloads are also, typically speaking, faster, or in the worst case scenarios like light productivity, equivalent to Intel's offering. However, performance does fall behind in data heavy benchmarks like Excel, Photoshop, and MATLAB. The amazing thing about most of these results is AMD is able to achieve, in many workloads, at least 25% better multi-thread performance, while also coming in with lower sustained power draw at 35 watts versus 45 watts. So what happens if you limit Intel's 9880H to a PL1 of just 35 watts using Intel's XTU software? Well, the margins grow even more here. While we do let these processors do what they normally do in the boost stage, so some benchmarks don't change too much, long-term workloads now are strongly in favor of AMD. Over 50% better performance in some situations is possible, and a 40% improvement to Handbrake is impressive. This means that an OEM designing a slim and light system with limited cooling will generally get the best experience by far going with Ryzen. Amazingly, even when we throw Intel's 45 watt power limit out the window and boost up to 90 watts forever, Intel still can't beat the 35 watt AMD processor in some long-term multi-thread workloads. In an astounding win for efficiency, the 4900HS is either equal to this 90 watt processor configuration or up to 15% faster. With these two systems going at it, I observed an 80 watt power draw difference from the wall. So if Intel wants to match AMD with 14nm CPUs by just raising power limits, laptops will need much larger coolers to cope with that. Comparing the 4900HS to the 9750H, and there is only one instance where the 9750H system can be faster, and that's with QuickSync accelerated Premiere encoding. In every other benchmark, including those where previously the 9880H was faster, now the 4900HS is faster. This bodes well for any future battles in the Ryzen 7 Core i7 range, where AMD has a core advantage in offering exclusively 8-core parts. And then let's look at how far AMD has come with Zen 2 versus Zen Plus in a 35 watt mobile design. The difference in some workloads here is absolutely staggering. Not only is AMD producing a 30% performance improvement in single thread workloads, they're able to deliver 2.5 times the performance in long-term multi-thread tasks like Blender, Handbrake, and Cinebench with the same power draw. That would have to be one of the largest gen-on-gen upgrades I've ever seen in terms of performance per watt. And I did promise a sneak peek at Ryzen 7 4800H performance on an engineering sample laptop I had quick hands-on time with. Going on a small subset of benchmarks, performance is looking equal to, if not slightly better than the 4900HS, which bodes very well for more mid-range systems that will use the Ryzen 7 part. Yes, the 4900HS is more efficient at 35 watts versus 45 watts, but the 4800H should still deliver pure 8-core performance. So, what do I think of AMD's Ryzen 9 4900HS and the improvements they've made in bringing Zen 2 on 7nm to mobile form factors? Well, just from a pure last gen versus current gen perspective, this is one of the most impressive mobile APU launches I've seen. The Ryzen 7 3750H was pretty difficult to recommend, let's be honest. It was handily beaten by Intel's mid-range parts, and performance was largely unimpressive in all aspects. But Ryzen 4000H series, well, now it's not just competitive in most workloads, it blows away Intel's equivalent CPUs. A 2.5 times jump in gen-on-gen performance for some workloads is no joke. It is a monumental upgrade. In practice, this means Ryzen 4000 is delivering the best performance for heavy productivity workloads you can get in a mobile form factor. And I can say that without even testing the higher power Ryzen 9 4900H, because the 35 watt variant in the Ryzen 9 4900HS is already leaving Intel's 8-core competitors in the dust. The Ryzen 9 4900HS is the best choice for core heavy work. I'm talking video encoding or transcoding, 3D rendering, file compression, that sort of thing. It's much faster and does so at at a lower power draw, allowing for better performance in a smaller form factor. Even in single thread workloads, AMD generally comes out on top, which means that the Premiere editing experience is better on the Ryzen 9 4900HS, for example. Throw in equal light productivity and app performance, and you've got yourself a very solid package that performs well in most key areas. Yes, technically, Intel's parts are somewhat competitive on a performance perspective if you remove their 45-watt long-term power limit. We saw that with the Core i9 9880H, and I expect it would be similar had we tested the flagship Core i9 9980HK. But to get that sort of performance, you need a larger laptop with a beefier cooler, and it'll likely run hotter too. The Ryzen 9 4900HS provides all that performance in smaller laptops, like this Zephyrus G14, and runs much cooler at the same time, at least with the systems that I tested. However, AMD's Ryzen 4000 CPUs aren't the complete package. There are a few limitations. One is with data-heavy workloads like number crunching massive spreadsheets in Excel, working with huge photos in Photoshop, or running MATLAB scripts. Intel came out ahead in these tests due to factors like having a larger cache. Lighter versions of these workloads perform equivalently on AMD, but if you're a big number cruncher, then Intel's core equivalent processors might be the way to go. The other is with workloads that use Intel exclusive technologies like QuickSync, Premiere encoding being one. If that's something you use all the time, then Intel is the way to go, although it's worth remembering that every other task in Premiere outside of QuickSync encoding is faster on Ryzen 4000, including editing and applying intensive effects like the warp stabilizer. But generally, outside those two instances, you'll have a better, faster productivity experience with these Ryzen 4000 8-core processors. And that's uncharted territory for AMD really. They've been behind in performance per watt for a very long time, which has hurt them in these mobile form factors. Not anymore. As it stands right now, Ryzen 4000 is the mobile productivity king, and the Ryzen 9 4900HS is a hugely impressive part of that lineup. And it seems that AMD will be offering this sort of performance at extremely competitive prices. The Zephyrus G14 with the Ryzen 9 4900HS and RTX 2060 Max-Q is retailing for about $1,500 US, I believe, which is firmly in the territory of 6-core Core i7 9750H laptops. The Core i9 9880H laptop that I bought for testing in this review cost $2,400 US, and it was one of the cheapest that I could find. Granted, it does have a much faster GPU for gaming, but right now you just won't find 8-core laptops in the $1,500 price range. So while lots of our data has been focusing on Ryzen 9 versus Core i9, they don't really compete on a price perspective, or at least for now, as this could change of course with the 10th generation Intel lineup. A few other minor notes to wrap up this review. With past Ryzen laptops, I didn't have the most stable experience, running into plenty of software bugs and crashes, which I've talked about on this channel a few times, but it's a completely different experience with the Ryzen 9 4900HS in this Asus Zephyrus G14. Even with a beta version of the GPU driver on this laptop, I ran into no stability issues, crashes, or applications refusing to work correctly. So far, my experience has been flawless, which is great to see. You also might be wondering about gaming performance with a discrete GPU. The Zephyrus G14 does include the GeForce RTX 2060 Max-Q after all. That's something we'll explore in a future video. I'm still working to get the best apples to apples comparison so you can get the clearest picture of which CPU delivers better performance, so I'm hoping to have that soon. Battery life will also be on people's minds, but it's not something we really test at Hardware Unboxed given we don't review individual laptops and it's too hard to do apples to apples comparisons. But I do encourage you to check out Jared Tech's review of the Zephyrus G14, which has battery life data with a much wider range of individual laptops than I could provide. Finally, I just want to close this one out with some comments on Intel 10th gen processors. Obviously this video is focused on Ryzen 4000 versus 9th gen, but we do have 10th gen coming just around the corner, likely within a month. Given rumors are suggesting Intel is sticking with 8-core parts in the H series and are still using 14nm technology, I just can't see how they can compete on a performance or efficiency level if all we're getting is a small clock speed bump with the same 14nm efficiency as the last few generations. Ryzen is going to pretty easily win this generation. We'll see that battle evolve soon, but based on what I'm seeing here, I don't hold high hopes for 10th generation, but of course you should check back in for our reviews of those processors when we get hands-on time with them. And that's it for this mammoth review and investigation into the Ryzen 9 4900HS. As I said, At the start of this review, I'm hoping to test many more SKUs in the Ryzen 4000 lineup, more H series stuff, Ryzen 7 of course, and then bringing us into U series at some point in the future when those laptops land. I've heard it's not too far away, so you shouldn't have to wait too long to see how those 15 and 25 watt numbers stack up. That's something I'm really excited in based on some of the performance we're seeing with this particular laptop. But yeah, lots of investigations to come on the laptop front. I think it's a really exciting time to be purchasing a new laptop based on 7nm type efficiency that we're getting here. So subscribe for all that stuff. As always, you can give this video a like if you enjoyed it. We have the Patreon page if you want to sign up and support us directly. It allows us to do things like buy $3,000 laptops to compare Ryzen laptops to get you guys with the best sort of apples to apples comparison. We wanted to make sure we had Core i9 numbers for this review, so buying laptops that cost a lot is something that Patreon members help us out with. So yeah, thanks to all those people that supported us there, and we'll catch you in the next one.